Thank you. Thank you, Cheto. Thank you, Cheto and Emoji, for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here. And first of all, I just wanted to thank GitHub for the opportunity to come speak at GitHub Satellite today. This is the first time that I'm presenting at a conference from the comfort of my own home. So it's pretty nice to be here in Chicago while reaching everyone around the world. So thank you for that. And then also, I'd like to thank AWS for allowing me to present at this conference as well. So as Cheto said, my name is Christian Weber. I am a developer advocate at AWS. And what I'm focused on is developer user experience and tooling and all of the dev tools that AWS has on our platform. So if you've ever used tools like Code Build, Code Commit, Cloud9, the AWS CDKs, the Cloud Development Kit, and so on and so forth, those are the tools that my team covers. And what we're focused on is really helping engineers and users and our customers use our tools that integrates into their workload because we want to meet customers and developers where they're at. So really what I'm looking forward to presenting in this talk is meeting a customer where they're at and helping them use our tools integrated with the GitHub and GitHub Actions platform. Just some quick housekeeping. AWS is still hiring like crazy. So during this time, if you are looking for work or need help navigating applying for AWS, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. That is my Twitter handle, and it will be available throughout. I'm really looking forward to talking with all of you today. So to jump into this, first I want to start with why this is important to me and why I think this is really important. So before I joined AWS and before I joined the technology sector, I spent about 7 years working in financial services from the operations side of the house. So if you can think of something to do in operations, chances are I served that role. I did level 1 support, level 2 support, level 3 support. I even wrote release automation pipelines. I helped manage those pipelines. I helped integrate monitoring solutions into the software that we were observing. I pretty much did it all. And as I transitioned out of financial services and moved into the tech sector about 5 years ago, I started noticing when talking to new customers in contemporary industries that other organizations and other industries were moving a lot faster than organizations that have a lot of constraints around security, compliance, and auditing. And so that experience that I had, I wanted to take that perspective and think about that lens of experience as I began my career in technology. So when I started putting together this talk, what I really wanted to cover was, what does that organization look like that is beginning their cloud journey? You know, a lot of organizations are adopting cloud native technology and cloud native application development, but a lot of times they struggle with existing methodologies, or they try a lift and shift sort of methodology in terms of how they're delivering software. And they struggle to deliver as fast as some of their competitors. And so really what I wanted to show here is the art of the possible and what we can do to help developers deliver faster. So I'd like to tell you a story of a fictional organization that is trying to overcome these constraints. And they're doing that with two really exciting teams, two great engineers by the name of Sara and Jen, who are our heroes throughout this journey. We're going to navigate the conversations that they have to help understand why they're using pull request-based workflows using tools like Elastic Beanstalk and GitHub Actions. We'll then segue into, well, now that they've taken a change, how do they deliver code to production? So to meet these groups and who they are, let's put them into two categories. Let's put them into application development and our production team, our operations team. So Team Sara is responsible for development and testing our application set. And Team Jen is delivering this application to production. While they collaborate, the organization that they work for is still constrained by their security and compliance requirements, and that Sara's team does not have access to the production environment in which they're deploying code. So how can we help? And these two teams were brought on specifically because their organization recently moved from waterfall style development and that they were receiving requirements and tearing that down into a structured release management process. and are now experimenting with methodologies such as continuous integration and continuous delivery. So Sara and Jen are our experts, and they've been brought on to help navigate this new way of thinking and this new way of working for this organization. At the same time, they're also responsible for developing new cloud-native applications. So one of the first things that they've been working on is an application to help relieve stress within their organization. In the industry that they work in, it's oftentimes very stressful for their end users and their customers, meaning that money can be lost very quickly or money can be made very quickly. But either way, it is a very high impact and high stressful environment. So they work together and they delivered an application that is absolutely mission critical to the delivery, to the business value, to the value of their business. And what this mission critical application does is when a user is under periods of extreme stress and duress, they can go to an internal web application or an internal website that is hosted by a very cute dog that gives them their favorite or random dad joke. They can go here at any time of the day, click on it, and now they've got a brand new joke. So this is very important for these users. They need to have this website up and running at any given moment. They need to scale. And most importantly, those two teams need to be able to work together to deliver and deploy. So when Sara and Jen began working together on this new application, one of the first things that they had to decide was, well, what code base or what technology am I going to use? And they started doing some research and they found common ground in the engineers that worked on both sides of the business. And they found that the common language and the common framework that was most used between the two groups was Python. So they chose Flask, a lightweight web application framework, specifically because it allowed them to include all of their front-end code and all of their back-end code, as well as their database models within the application. In addition to that, they decided that they wanted all of their application infrastructure, which they were treating as code, to live right next to the code base as well. So when they got to delivery, they wouldn't have to navigate very far, and they could experiment and use it as they would their regular application code. Next, once they decided on that, the next thing that they had to think about and make a decision on was the application architecture. Where exactly am I of software and how am I going to host it? Am I going to use a traditional server? Am I going to use a regular EC2 instance? Am I going to manage all of the security updates and the patches? And as Sara and Jen talked about it, what they realized they needed was an ability to deliver code quickly and move on to the next feature so their developers could focus on new tasks as they came in. So as they looked at all of the options, the platform that fit best for that organization was Elastic Beanstalk. And for them, the benefits were obvious for them. They wanted to be able to move quickly, but more importantly, they wanted to maintain infrastructure. They needed to maintain their infrastructure in a streamlined fashion. They didn't want to have to manually spin up and connect resources. And they wanted to be able to, again, deploy code and move on to the next feature. So when they looked at how Elastic Beanstalk could solve their issue, they saw that all of it was deployed automatically, and they could focus on the change that's at hand. No worrying about security groups, setting up their own Elastic load balancers, or setting up their own within an availability zone, no having to worry about auto scaling and so forth. And then for their database layer, they chose Amazon RDS, a managed database service, for their MySQL backend. So this is great, but now the next thing happens, a feature change, a feature request comes in. So if you remember the website that I posted here a few slides ago, Sara and Jen are responsible for a website that has a very important need in the business, right, to help developers relieve stress. And they recently got feedback from a team that is relying on this application and let them know that while the application was great, the background color was a little bit straining on the eyes. And when they were going there to help them feel better throughout the day, they think it would be a little bit nicer if maybe that background color was just a little bit easier on the eyes. It doesn't have to be a lot, but what could they do about that? So in this new way, in this new model of delivering software, what does that look like for the individual developer? How can they deliver a change? Well, for the individual developer, nothing much has to change unless they need it to. So in this case, a developer would clone a repository locally. They would get it up and running as per a development environment. So they would use the internal Flask web server or internal Flask development server to make a change. They would go into a CSS document. They would edit the body tag in there to be a little bit softer color. So in this case, a little bit slightly more yellow to be easier on the eyes. And go ahead and make that change and be okay with it. Now, in the traditional world of application delivery, where this organization was before, this change was a little bit hard to get feedback on, and it was difficult for a developer to push this out to another environment. What they would have to do is package up that software, package up all of the dependencies, send that over to another team, either through email or some sort of drop, and then they would have to hope that they had provided enough instructions and have that to be delivered. Now, Sara and Jen knew that they didn't want to repeat this kind of process. And they took a look at the tools that they had, and they knew that Git and GitHub were two important tools that they were using with this. And they figured that there had to be a better way to help get feedback very quickly. So that what they decided on was that they were going to decide that for their test environments and for their development environments, the pull request was going to be the change set, was going to be the entire scope of change for their developer. They also had a requirement that no environment was going to be set up beforehand. So no managing infrastructure, no managing a test server or UAT server. Essentially, we want this infrastructure to be event-driven. We want our environment configuration to live with our code. And at the same time, because we have that requirement around developers not having access to production, we have to keep our main line or our release branch protected at all times. So a developer shouldn't be able to go in there, click the button, and then all of a sudden in production, we have a change, because that's the constraint within our organization. So that brings up quite a challenge for Sara and Jen, because they have all these constraints, and how can they work together and collaborate to understand how each other is working? Well, that's exactly what they did. They had to collaborate and understand each other's changes and how people were applying changes. So in our case, how would Sara's application development team test a change? Well, Sara and Jen worked together quite a bit, and they came up with a solution around actions and GitHub Actions. And what they decided on was that the pull request would represent their development environment. And in GitHub, there is a very handy feature on the back end that says for every time an event like a pull request is open, we can trigger a GitHub action to execute on our behalf. And what that action can do is go out to AWS, send it some information about our pull request, and go ahead and deploy that infrastructure. This allowed this team to get a production-like environment without long-running infrastructure. Sara and Jen had talked about this because long-running infrastructure in their organization caused a lot of prior pain, in that servers that were running for a long time tended to have dependency drift and tended to become very unique and very hard to maintain. So when a test was going through a server like this, it was very often hard to understand whether or not it would stay the same and deploy just the same in production. Another requirement that they needed in this sort of workflow was the ability to promote this environment via a blue-green deployment methodology. Because when they were deploying front-end changes like this, they needed to be able to get feedback from their users through methods such as A/B testing. So what happened here is Actions was able to facilitate all of this. And I know what you're thinking right now. This is a lot of information to take in. And by the way, it kind of sounds magical in a way. How is all of this possible? What is the magic trick? What is the secret sauce? And I'm sorry to inform you, there really is no magic trick for this. What happened here was Sara and Jen came together, collaborated, and understood each other's requirements. Because they were working together on a common goal and a common stream of information, they understood what the steps were necessary to create a repeatable environment without having to do it manually. Because they knew even if they were able to define all of the manual steps in a runbook, sometimes human error happens. And while that was okay, they knew there was a better way to make this repeatable. So they chose GitHub Actions for that. And the way that they structured it was they wanted to make sure that they had a build environment that would. So they created a build environment with the Elastic Beanstalk CLI, showing that they could just download the CLI application, they could run it, install all of its necessary dependencies, and then once that was done, they could then go into their testing, whether that was linting with Flake8 or running their own unit test and PyTest. They could execute all of those tests before it was delivered to their test environment to make sure that there wouldn't be any gotchas when it was sent out to a QA or a UAT environment. Once all of that was done, then they could move into the actual deployment phase of their test change. So rather than hard code all of their parameters for AWS, like their AWS tokens, they started using GitHub's secret parameter store that would allow them to store their parameters in one place and then be able to update that in GitHub Actions by importing them as environment variables. Once all of that was done, they could then begin the process of deploying a brand new Elastic Beanstalk application. And what that did is it did a few things for us. It allowed us to see this environment, but most importantly, it allowed our stakeholders to see our change as quickly as possible. So what this did for the individual stakeholder is it created a brand new website that anybody in that organization could go to. And it was based on the name of the repository owner, and the PR number. So for somebody managing all of this infrastructure, they could easily go into a console or make an API call to see exactly how many environments they have running at any given time and to see what exactly is running. They decided that they needed this infrastructure to live as long as they needed it. So if they needed more stakeholder feedback on bigger changes, they could let it live as long as they needed it. So no automated deleting or anything like that. And at the same time, because it was scoped to a pull request, they could then invite stakeholders back to the code review and let them sign off from there if they decided to. So all of that collaboration lives with the code and stays with the code. So perfect world, we've got a brand new change, right? Sara and Jen have done a great job up until this point, and now we're at a little bit of a crossroads here. How do we end up deploying this change to production? Because even though we've gotten all the way to this point, we still have that issue of, well, Sara's team cannot deliver this to production. Jen's team has to do that. So let's go back to our previous slide where we talked about our delivery process. And now we've shifted from the top part of the action, which is sending our pull request event to Elastic Beanstalk via actions. Now we're going to go ahead and begin on the bottom half of our process, which says when a pull request is merged, we're going to trigger a new event, and we're going to send that event to code pipeline based on the event that is triggered from when we merge that code to our release branch. And at that point, we're going to use code pipeline to further solidify and create a linear deployment that allows us to stagger all of our deployments and still get continued stakeholder sign-off. And again, this allows us to keep us in a methodology that allows us to deliver in a blue-green fashion, but at the same time gives us traceability because, again, we are tying this back to the GitHub pull request and all of the commits within that repository. So that's where this handoff comes into play. How can we actually get this delivered to production? And that's where code pipeline plays a pivotal role here. Again, it triggers on that big green button, and it allows the developer to separate their responsibility to their operations team. And now Team Jen can safely deliver this production Elastic Beanstalk environment without additional intervention. Again, we talked about what the requirements were for this organization. They needed to be able to deploy this in a blue-green fashion. So how are they going to be able to do that? Do they do that with code pipeline? Well, it becomes a simple part of their process where, in addition to code pipeline, they're going to use AWS Route Fee with weighted routing policies that directs traffic based on the rules that they set. So what they've done here is created two record sets for their website. So when anybody comes to their website, the majority of the traffic, which will go to their blue environment, which is their existing environment. And when they introduce that brand new change, they will only send a segment of that traffic there. What that allows them to do is observation and testing. So they can release to production to a small set of users. So if they have 100 active users, only 10 users will see this change until they decide to route all of the traffic to the new environment, to the merged environment. So now we can do things like capture telemetry. We could even do A/B testing, and which would allow us to capture the metrics to maybe understand how often or how long are users sitting on that page now with the brand new background color. Once they have come to an agreement on that this change looks okay, they can simply delete the old environment and promote the green environment to blue and route all of the traffic through there. And this allows them to really lock things down. And this is all driven by Code Pipeline. So again, we talked about what the requirements were. And this is what Code Pipeline looks like in action. I will say that this is a very simple, for Jen and Sara, this is a very simple deployment, but these can be as complex as an organization requires. So if you have a situation where in the past, you've been bitten by issues where people are deploying ahead of you or deploying while you're testing your functional test, which causes your production environment to break, Code Pipeline is helping not only Sara and Jen mitigate that, but would also help you mitigate that as well. So what that means is that everything is queuing up for your deployment pipeline. And in this case, how we've designed this is that every time a source check-in comes in, it will automatically require an additional layer of approval from your approval team. Now, that approval team is defined as within an IAM policy as a subset of users that you yourself can define. So what this gives you is the ability to have traceability and auditability as well as gating all of your deployments. None of these deployments will occur in this scenario until somebody has approved it. Now, that brings up a really interesting question. What happens when a developer pushes a new change and they want to leapfrog? Well, in this case, we don't allow leapfrogging. We only allow approvals for changes as they come in sequentially, because when Sara and Jen were looking at this organization, they understood that this was the best way for this team and this organization to deliver software. But it can be absolutely configured. So if you have an example of maybe needing to run a database migration because a developer cannot run a database migration themselves, or an operations vault cannot do that, you can certainly set that as a sub-step and bring in the necessary team to do that for you as well. And then most importantly, what you get is the ability to have execution history. The most important thing for highly regulated industries that are delivering software is to have that traceability and that auditability, and to be able to understand that if a bug does get delivered to production, it's certainly not the end of the world, but we do need to understand where that was introduced. And when we start deploying code within a subset of a pull request, we can then see and keep that grouped to our Code Pipeline deployments as well. You'll see on the left-hand side that there's a column for source revisions, and you'll see the SHA commit right there. And Code Pipeline with the native GitHub integration will automatically go back to that commit to show you that point in history of when that change was introduced. You also get source artifacts that are automatically created. So if you have a situation where maybe your organization is being audited 6 months from now and you need to be able to go back, well, now you have a copy at a point in time at that commit that you can provide to that auditor. Or if you have an external contractor that needs access to source code, but you have a very stringent security policy around who gets access to a repository, well, you can certainly send them that source artifact as well. And then you also have the capability of rolling back and rolling forward. So if a change needs to be reverted, you can certainly use a revert PR in GitHub, which will then send your change as it needs to through the Code Pipeline. So we've talked about quite a bit here today, and some of these methodologies can seem almost impossible for some organizations. And I will say that there is no silver bullet to any of this. What this solution came down to was two teams collaborating with each other and finding out ways that each other's teams were working and how they could meet in the middle Because if we think about how software is being delivered today and what we've seen prior to the past, we're seeing a more community focused style of software development where we're not just employees, we're becoming citizens of the code that we're delivering and deploying, and we're becoming citizens within our teams. And so we're breaking down silos and we're building trust. The only way that teams are going to be able to move faster is by developing processes and mechanisms that each other's teams can use to help. And from there, you'll start building a culture of transparency and trust, which I think is probably more important than just about anything I've talked about today. But I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen today, and I hope you're staying safe, and I hope you're staying healthy. I will be on the GitHub discussion forum for the next 30 minutes to answer any questions that you might have around Code Pipeline and GitHub Actions, or any other questions that you might have. So again, thank you so much, and have a great day.